This should work.
So you were explaining that Rudy and John are the founding Lange brothers.
Right, and they're the second and third brothers in that family, with Otto being the eldest, and he had a son, Johannes, that came here after the war.
So Johannes was the first Lange in the U.S., or
No.
I mean Otto.
Actually, Uncle Rudy came first. A year later, my father followed, and bringing his bride, not his bride, but Uncle Rudy's bride, Frida. But at that time, they weren't even allowed on the same deck together.
Oh.
So they were on the same ship. And then Uncle Rudy and Aunt Frida got married.
Why weren't they allowed on the same deck?
It was just how it was done back then. There was a deck for women, there was a deck for men.
I see.
I have no idea what couples did. I assume they were allowed to be together, but I don't know that.
And Rudy, your Uncle Rudy was telling us that...
No, my cousin Rudy.
Cousin Rudy.
Uncle Rudy's dead.
Okay. Cousin Rudy was telling us that... Was it Johannes? Or no? Was telling us that when they went to Germany recently, Johannes was saying he remembered leaving. He remembered the day he left, and he left pretty quickly from the town in Poland. And I'm guessing did your grandfather come?
Yes, grandfather Rudy came. No, was got my uncle, got my cousin. And he has a son. He's 4. Yes, grandfather Rudy came after the war.
Okay.
Whereas Uncle Rudy and my father came in the late 1920s.
Okay.
And Johannes must have come after the war too.
Okay.
And it's interesting, I remember the discussion about my grandfather Rudy and his daughter fleeing, because that was now, at the time, it actually became Poland. And they had to walk out. I have some patients that have walked out. There was a city created in the Soviet Union because a German princess must have married into the royalty of the Soviet Union. So they moved a bunch of German people and created a German city within the Soviet Union, so she wouldn't feel lonesome. And wouldn't be homesick. Wouldn't be homesick. Well, I had a couple that walked out together after the war because they really didn't want to stay there because Germans were not thought of kindly at that point in time. I digress.
So why did they decide to come along here? How did they make that decision to come here?
They had a sponsor, a minister. I don't remember the minister's name, and I think and I don't know all the mechanics of that, but I know that they were always grateful for this minister that sponsored them.
Could you tell us about how your family kind of operated in Thurston Woods? Did they start the business immediately? Or?
No. Let's see. Actually, initially they may have gone to Michigan.
Okay.
A little hazy about that, but then the minister moved here to Milwaukee, so they followed. And I know that my Uncle Rudy worked for a place that built cabinets for radios. And my father had some kind of woodworking job, but then the Depression hit. And then I think they both desperately sort of looked for any kind of work. I know my father was very happy to basically get a valet job for a live-in help where he would get his room board maybe, and a very small amount of money per month. But it was better than nothing.
And this was in Milwaukee?
This was by that time they were in Milwaukee.
And was he married at the time? Or?
My father was not married. Aunt Frida and Uncle Rudy got married in 1930. November 1st, actually. And it was during the Depression that Lange Brothers must have been founded in 1933. There's a plaque, and Rudy would know about that. It's down at the shop. But initially they operated out of a garage.
Okay. Did your family always do woodworking?
Well, certainly Uncle Rudy, my father, lifelong, yes. And they had been trained. Their father was considered a master cabinet maker, but he was not allowed to train them.
Okay.
But he knew another master cabinet maker that was willing to do that. That's how they learned the trade before they came here. So all of their education's lifelong. But when they came, they were master cabinet makers.
Could you describe your childhood in Thurston Woods? Where did you play? What did you like to do?
Played in the trees of Thurston Woods. I know one of the things that disappointed me early on was that there was not a sidewalk in front of the house. That was a dirt road. Maybe I think it was a dirt road. It could have been asphalt, I'm not sure, but it wasn't real kid-friendly. There was no sidewalk. Now there was a sidewalk around the house that you've seen. And I really wanted a sidewalk. But I played with the kids in the neighborhood. There were 2 empty lots that now I think they're a little bit north of the house. I'm guessing 6 houses that were vacant. 1 or 2 lots that were vacant. There were trees on there, and we loved to climb those trees. The trees were made for climbing.
And why did you want sidewalks?
Oh, for, what do you call those things? I'll call it a kiddie car that you could pedal.
Oh, okay.
And because it was hard, you'd always have to lift it and turn around because the sidewalk only went through the front to the back. That was it. And by the time we did get sidewalks, I had outgrown that urge, but I do remember that.
Could you tell us a bit about the house that you grew up in and kind of memories you have of the house?
Yeah, I will say something about my mother. My mother was born in Milwaukee. No, take that back. Her father worked for Palmolive Soap, and there was a soap factory here in Milwaukee, and they were opening a new factory in Toronto. He went up there. He was there for about 6 months. The whole family moved with him, and so while they were there, she was born, but then they moved back to Milwaukee. So that was where she's not from Germany. And then, I'm sorry, then your question about the house?
Yeah. Just what you remember about the house, kind of any fond memories you have. Growing up. You've seen the banister, and it was fun when I was younger, sliding down the banister. My father did talk about how that wouldn't be good for the spindles, but he did tell me, obviously I was not involved in the construction at all, because I was born after the house was already done. But there was 3 spindles per step, and they were secured in such a way that they shouldn't become loose, and they're still not loose, at least last time I checked, in spite of the fact they were abused by a kid sliding down the banister.
Mavis said that your mother was the one who insisted on 3 spindles per step.
She's probably right, because maybe she talked to my mother about it. I honestly don't know, but I know that was certainly one of the things they talked about, and that my father talked about, in the way that they were secured. I guess you're an architect, so what they did was that spindle is a little bit longer than usual. So when you slide it through the step, they had a slot and then they secured it with a wedge. In addition to being glued and nailed. Which that's, from what I understand, that's not how you normally do a spin.
It sounds like they were thinking ahead about kids playing on the stairs.
Could be. And yeah, you saw the molding, and that's a little bit atypical for a typical residential home. Obviously, you're more upscale. They put in a lot of features that, in retrospect, my father was not an architect. Initially when they first started in '33, their customers would be Christmas toys. There was a blue bunny that they made that would, pull toy, and the head and the tail would go up and down and that sort of thing. So they did toys, they did chairs. One of their big jobs was for an orthopedic surgeon in Milwaukee that understood they didn't have a lot of money and forwarded the money, fronted the money for the material. I did try to track down the exam tables, but they had been tossed by the time I went looking for them. So initially it was a very small business. There are pictures of, obviously, I never saw a picture of the garage. Apparently it was just a garage that was sitting on the property where Lange Brothers actually is. But pictures I saw are more like from the early, I'm guessing early 40s, and by that time it started to grow. There was a stimulus package going on from the government called World War II.
Yeah.
So the neighborhood was annexed to the city of Milwaukee in 1956. Do you know if your family was supportive of that move? Or
I think so, because I think they wanted the fluoridated water. They did have a well. I think the timing went well because I think the well failed about the same time.
Your cousin Rudy told us about during the war, the Lange brothers were commissioned to make a lot of stools for factories and
Stools?
Stools.
Yes. So there was big stool production. There was big bunk bed production for the military. And they made crates for shell casings. I think bomb shell casings, but I'm not really sure about that. And the casings were being built at A.O. Smith. I know my father felt very guilty. He went there one time to probably measure stuff. And that was considered a war production facility, and they had security. And he was talking to another gentleman that was there that I think he had 2 sons in the Marine Corps. And that gentleman wasn't allowed in. And he felt the guy was native born, and he felt really strange because he still had a very German accent, and he had no problems getting in.
Yeah, at Havenwoods there was an internment camp for Germans. Did your father ever talk about that?
I just know it was there, didn't really talk about it. Rudy might have more, he would have been a teenager then.
Okay.
So maybe that was a bigger deal for him. He would have been more mobile. So I don't know if Rudy was able to recall anything.
What other, besides your home, did you play in other places around?
Oh, there were neighborhood children my age. There was a family across the street with 2 twin sons that were about my age, and it was certainly interesting that one of them had open heart surgery in the early 50s at Mayo Clinic, which was certainly, pun intended, cutting-edge stuff that was going on in the 50s. Quite different from how we do things now. Although some of these techniques are coming back, they didn't have, you couldn't put people on bypass. They didn't have that then. So what they would do is they'd pack the body in ice. And so that was a great discussion between me and the guy across the street, because he thought it was
And as a teenager, how did you were still living in the neighborhood?
Oh yeah, I stayed. I didn't move out of the house until 1974.
Okay. And what did you see during your life?
Well, I think one of the big things was that the road came in with the curves and the sidewalks, which was, although that was, if you're on 1960, I'm guessing that there'd be records, because records are much more better than memories. I always had a lot of friends in the neighborhood. Immediately to the north, to the house where Mavis actually moved from, friend Dan was there. And there was a friend David immediately to the. Wait, I got it backwards. Dan was to the north. David was to the south. So I had friends on either side. There was an architect in back with the sort of a log cabin you can see in the backyard. That's supposed to be the oldest. Part of it is the oldest building in the neighborhood. It's a log cabin, and the house is sort of built around it. They had children that were older that I really didn't socialize with. Next to them, going north, there's a white fence there. That'd be Mr. Wagner. His kids were older. I really barely. I didn't meet really their kids at all. Mr. Wagner was more of a friend of my parents, so I got to see him. And then if you go next house, who were they? There were two boys there too that I played with. Across the street, going further south, small ranch home, friend Dennis that I still have contact with from time to time. So, and then there were other kids further away, but and as I got older, they would expanded my, the circle of friends. Now, many of these people were in school with me, but not all of them. There were two parochial schools in the neighborhood. One's a Lutheran school, I think is still there, and then St. Albert's was to the north. That's now a public school unless they've closed it. Because a few schools are getting closed.
Which school did you go to?
I went to Carleton, which was closed, but I'm told they're going to reopen. It's still part of MPS. And I believe the architect for that was the guy across the alley.
I'm guessing that you got a car when you were a teenager. Or
No.
Did you have a car? Okay.
No, I have no one now, but got a motorcycle. Initially, my brother and I purchased a motorcycle, and what was it? 150 cc something. It was either a Kawasaki or a Yamaha. No, it was not a Honda. It was a Honda, maybe. Yeah, Honda.
How did that change the way you... Did you stay in the neighborhood, or because you had the motorcycle, did you start leaving more?
Oh, probably. You would think I'd have to, but I don't remember friends more distant. Well, no, I take that back. When I went to junior high, then the friends were further away. I didn't have the motorcycle then. I presume mostly would have been my mother would have driven me around. I was pretty spoiled. I got really pretty good, whatever I wanted to do, she would accommodate. My father was usually working, so that wouldn't be a problem. Then it was in high school that I got the motorcycle, and how do we work out the car? Because I didn't get a car. I got a used Volkswagen when I went to college, which was at Marquette, but I could still live at home. And then somewhere along the way, I got a Duster, which was my first new car. But I'm not sure exactly when I got the Duster. Oh, when I broke the Volkswagen. 1971, I would have gotten the Duster. Totaled the Volkswagen, which that's not hard to do when you have an old Volkswagen.
I'm curious about the alleyways. Mavis keeps a pretty close eye on her alley. Did you play in the alley? Did you?
Oh, sure.
Could you tell me?
It's like you might have a pickup baseball game with the guys that we talked about, and then of course you'd have to move. But it wasn't really much to move because you knew where second base was, you knew where home was. Maybe it was drawn out in chalk, so we would just have to move as a car would come through. But the cars, we didn't really have people speeding in the alleys. The alleys really are not good for speeding in anyhow, except in movies. So no, we play, and we primarily play in, if you will, our alley, as opposed to going across the street. I mean, I would go to, it was Dennis's house that was to the south, and he would come over to my house. So it wasn't like there was a restriction going up and down. We just happened, maybe our alley was a little bit flatter, because if you go toward Dennis's house, there's sort of a progressive hill. So.
Did you play sports in the alleys more than in open lots, or?
Oh, we would. memories are funny because I know that there's Smith Park to the south. We would go to the park. I'm thinking, there was bicycles. There was a place you could play at St. Albert's, and then sometimes we would take the bike to Carleton because they have a very large playground, which is still there.
But the alley was kind of a place.
It was easy to do. It was closer. It was more proximal. I imagine with age, because your memory plays funny tricks, we probably went more to the park than we did in the alley. But the alley was very convenient, friendly,
Mm-hmm. And could your mother keep an eye on you if you were playing in the alley?
I don't remember her doing that. Maybe she did. If she did in such an unobtrusive way, I don't recall it.
Could you tell me more about your mother? What are your main memories of her in the house or outside the house?
Well, she early on she would hang the laundry outside to dry, which gives it a different kind of freshness. But later on, I think she used to dryer more when I was home. I don't know when that transition occurred. But I remember being outside. I know that one of my memories when I was obviously very small was that, that would entail the use of clothespins. And she would give me 10 clothespins to play with that were numbered. So I probably started an introduction to numbers and that sort of thing. I do remember that. In the house, I'd play with marbles. I did play a lot of board games that most of the neighbors didn't want to play with me anymore because I guess I've been accused of not being the best winner in the world.
Do you want to ask some more questions?
Do you have any general impressions of the neighborhood as it exists today? I mean, have you been back in recent years?
Yeah, I visited Mavis not so long ago. Clearly I would view it as an integrated neighborhood now. Clearly it wasn't that when I was growing up. But, heck, that's a perception that may or may not be accurate. It's just a perception. We did have, for a while, that Mayor Meyer lived kitty corner. There's that White House in the one corner. I don't know if anyone pointed that out to you. That the Gales used to live in, related to, I believe, the dairy industry. I know the mayor lived there when there were some riots in Milwaukee, and so one morning we woke up and I remember seeing a police motorcycle parked in the alley across the street between the mayor's house and Dennis's house, and the guy was sitting there with some kind of weapon across the handlebars. I felt it was a safe neighborhood. I still feel it's a safe neighborhood, but what do I know? That's not looking at any crime statistics or anything. I just feel comfortable in the neighborhood.
There were a couple of years when you were still living there and Mavis had moved in, Mavis
Yes.
and Tom. How
when did they move in?
1972. Maybe you were a college student.
I was pretty busy. I mean, I may have lived there, but I sort of came there and slept.
I guess I'm wondering.
I don't remember any big deal about it, one way or the other.
Okay, so people were probably welcoming, or at least in. Okay.
They moved, I think, before Mavis was there, and I could be wrong about this. Mm-hmm. I mentioned I had a boyfriend that lived there, and actually they may have moved before that. There may have been an owner in between. But going back to the Daniel and his parents, you'd sort of say hi, but we didn't have block parties. I don't ever remember being entertained in their house other than maybe Daniel playing a board game, or him coming to, Dan and I were together much more. Our parents just didn't socialize.
I see.
And the friend the other way, David, that would be toward Thurston. Mm-hmm. I believe his mom was a single mom because I don't remember ever seeing his father. I don't remember talking about that. I just played with Dave. It wasn't an issue. And his grandmother lived there. But once again, it was hello type of thing. just how it was. And now I have no idea who lives in where David lives.
It's the house just to the south.
That's where David lived. Daniel was just to the north, where Mavis initially moved in the neighborhood.
Yeah, Mavis says she doesn't really know much about that neighbor to the next to Thurston.
Either, yeah. You know, it's. I know that we thought that they took excellent care of their property, better than whoever moved into David's house. And I have no idea who moved into David's house, but they did have a hole in their roof for a while. And we understood when they fixed the roof that there were raccoons living in there. So we were happy they fixed the roof.
I don't know. I think the question you asked was the question I wanted to ask, so I don't have any other questions.
Did you ask about yards?
I don't know if there's anything I want to ask in particular.
Yeah, that patio area that Mavis has initially was, well, I remember a swing set being there and a sandbox that my father had built. And the cat loved the sandbox, but we lived with that. And I know there was a top built for it to keep the cat out. And then it evolved into more of a patio-like area initially with crushed stones, and Mavis has done an awful lot to really upgrade all of that.
Well, did your parents do anything with the front yard? Was the front yard just kind of a lawn?
Well, you know, they really went out of the way when they were placing the house on the lot to minimize tree loss. And Mavis was relating to me that somewhere after they moved in, they did a refinance, as a lot of people have done. And when they were in the process of refinancing, there was a tree right next to the den. And they wouldn't give them a mortgage till they took that tree down. Because they said, that tree is going to fall in the house, so you're going to have to take that tree out if you want a new mortgage. And she also said it somehow was affecting the foundation, but that was part of how close they really worked to save as many trees as they could. I don't know if they planted any trees in front of those of the trees that were there. Gradually, there was a tree planted in front of this. There's that picture window for the living room. I think there was a tree, but is that tree still there? Did that tree die? I think the tree's gone. But gradually trees did die, and they would bring in people. Usually these were people that had worked for Wisconsin Energy. That's what they did, but on weekends they would do their own thing, and they would take down the trees without damaging the house or the neighbors or themselves. Because some of those are pretty big trees.
Yeah.
And so slowly the trees went away, but I don't really remember them being replaced. You know, where that lamppost is, there was a tree there, but it got replaced with a lamppost.
Well, I can't think of anything else.
It was good.
It was a great place to grow. It was real, you know, I know there are a lot of architectural features to the house. In retrospect, I really took all of that for granted. It was the people that lived there that to me made it special. But looking at it, I can see how come people may want to write about the architecture. But in retrospect, you know, our daughter lives in Boston right now, and so sometimes she'll come to visit or we'll go visit, and then there's always that discussion of where should we eat, and it really doesn't make any difference as long as we can be together as a family. And so as good as the architecture is, and I realized they put an awful lot of thought in that house, the people were better than the house.
That's what I've heard from you. Your childhood was more about the people than the places.
That's right. Even with respect to the friends, you know, that I still see Dennis from time to time. Although, you know, we are on different career paths. Whereas the other, you know, the twin boys, they moved. I have no idea where they went. And with a lot of the neighbors, they moved. Don't know where they went.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking to us.
Built homes. And so he provided cabinets for that. Well, but he worked out of his home, and that's how they met. And he helped build the house, but I would say from more of a building perspective, clearly my parents designed the house. And some of the design, I think they looked at some of the stuff my Uncle Rudy had done earlier, because there are some similarities. Have you seen that house too? That's on 34th Street.
Yeah.
So there are some design similarities. But like the squirrels, the squirrels in the shutters, that was stolen from Mr. Wagner.
Oh,
He had
okay.
squirrels on his, that would be sort of right behind the garage. It's a white structure.
Tom and Mavis have talked about him a lot. He sounds like quite a character, quite a kind man too.
Both he and his wife. The people in the neighborhood were, we talked to them too, but I don't ever remember going over to the house for a meal or them coming to our house for a meal. They didn't work that way.
Also, the house you described is now inhabited by Mavis's nephew.
Yes.
So, so there was an effort to keep those in her family. How do you feel about her that now these two houses are still linked by blood? Is that?
Well, until Mavis did that, they weren't linked by anything. I am grateful that there are people that Mavis and her family are maintaining these houses in a very nice way, and I'm sure that Rudy feels the same thing about his homestead being maintained, because they're doing an excellent job. Although I understand that one may be in foreclosure, maybe not, I'm very glad that Mavis is taking care of where I grew up, because I grew up in that house, and then in 1974 I got married. I moved to my second place I lived, and now I'm at where